How the Demon Castle Came to Be. Chapter 6, First Part.
Looks like it's over, more or less. They're putting the tents up now. With two fellas there, they should be fine. One of them is wounded, though.
The hoarse voice was slammed by the gusting snow. Lowering the left hand he'd held out toward the rocky ridge, Dee turned in a different direction, looking down at the sarcophagus at his feet. He was inside the aircraft, and the ceiling and side of the fuselage had been torn apart. A chain lay coiled like a snake, and a thick lid that looked to weigh about a ton had been knocked casually to the floor.
Well, that Duke Gilson sure is one hell of a nobleman. More than 10,000 years trapped in this coffin, buried under rocks and dirt, and there isn't even the smallest trace of malice or indignation. He must have been too busy to hold on to such things. A little break. Some relaxation time, eh?
A great many murals and ancient writings documented examples of nobles who'd closed themselves away in coffins to escape from the world. Dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. As if infatuated with these words, many nobles bid adieu to the moonlight and masquerades, then sealed themselves away in the earth. Though the reason was unknown, in two places writings were discovered that described a weariness with the material world. This is where the concept of relaxation time originated. Later excavation discovered that most of those who'd abandoned this world had never returned to the surface again, having taken their only way out of eternal life under the cold, dark soil. All that remained in the bottom of the coffin was opulent clothing and accessories, a pile of dust, and a blood-stained stake of ash. What had they reflected on in their coffins, and what had they felt? Of course, Duke Gilson hadn't returned to the soil of his own accord. His hatred and frustration could well be imagined. And yet, the hoarse voice said there were none. Hate distilled to its purest form, Dee said softly. After shattering the bounds of comprehension, it becomes a void and no trace of it can be detected. But that void takes the impurities from any and every emotion.
Do you know anyone whose body burns with pure hatred?
Nothing from the hunter.
It would probably literally burn out your body. Does Gilson still have a human form or not? Hell, the mountain folk he bit came back to life in broad daylight. Dee, there's no record of Gilson having that ability. Maddened by hate in his coffin, he must have developed that power. If left unchecked, the vampires he creates could rise from their graves in daylight and set off like an army in search of human lifeblood. Who could stop demons of darkness unfazed by the sun?
The voice stopped there for a moment. It had to calm itself from its agitated state. Soon it continued.
Not you. You don't measure up to Gilson yet. The only thing in our favor is that your power increases day by day. But still, you're only a match for what he was 10,000 years ago. You can't compare to what he is now. You can't fight him.
My job is to rescue survivors, locate the cargo they carried, and dispose of its contents.
And that's why I'm telling you not right now. You'll get the chance, guaranteed. You just have to bide your time.
His castle was on this mountain. The aircraft crash landed here. There's no coincidence. A tremendous will is working toward Gilzen's revival. If he gets into his castle, it'll be the end of the world.
A land of endless night, you mean?
But I'm going. Before he'd even spoken, Dee was in motion. The instant he stepped from the fuselage, gusting snow enveloped him. But since the aircraft itself was riddled with holes, it wasn't much of a change.
Where are we headed?
To search for his castle. It should be up there.
What about the others? Oh, that's right. You said they'd be better off not going. Took all that into consideration when you left them behind, did you? But I didn't think Gilzen would come off into this.
As if to say all that would depend on their fate, Dee headed forward without even a glance back at the rocky ridge. The rock shelf snaked along the mountainside.
Looks like the poor crew was at luck,
the hoarse voice said. Its tone wasn't exactly maudlin. Luck was luck. Nothing to get emotional about there.
There were some bloodstains, but nothing that they couldn't survive. No doubt Gilzen carried him off when he got out of his coffin. With some repairs, the bird might fly again. They weren't quite as lucky as it was.
After following the line of the mountain for 50 yards from the aircraft, Dee halted. The rock shelf abruptly ended there. His beautiful, if not glowing, visage looked up at a rock face that was nearly vertical. Though enough to daunt the average person or even a professional climber, the mountainside didn't seem a serious obstacle to this young man. The only reason he looked up was to determine the most direct route for his ascent. And less than 5 seconds later, Dee was reaching for protrusion from the rock face with one hand. Gliding up the wall of rock like a heavenly reptile, the figure seemed to take the blustering wind and snow like a lovely serenade to his beauty. Page break indicated by a small cross. He comes, the one from earlier, a wrinkled, withered old voice said. Though the voice seemed to be that of an old man, the face and form that rose from the faint gloom were those of a crone. Dressed in what appeared to be dozens of layers of cloth, each stitched together from multicolored scrap, she resembled the sort of vagabond women that could often be found in frontier villages. But she didn't have a vagabond's eyes, or a vagabond's nose, or even a vagabond's mouth. All of these features she lacked. The face crowned with hair that frizzed out like broken springs had nothing save a single blood-red eyeball set in the middle of it. What do you make of this? A different voice inquired. Darkness loomed by the crow's side, and not in the sense of a person merely dressed in black. The square room was split down the middle, with the old woman in the light half, and the other half filled with darkness. Where the crone was, white held sway. Here and there were glimpses of a luster sheen in what seemed to be an unusually cramped room. But then behind the crone it seemed to go on forever, spreading to the very ends of the earth, as it were. And before long, the lustrous things that had seemed to prove how tight the quarters were had changed their positions, so that the space bounding the old woman looked to be infinite. Where was this place? And who was it that lurked in the darkness? He is a fearsome opponent, the crone replied. Her grey complexion turned paler still. At present, His Highness the Duke is stronger, But even this old woman can't say if such will be the case tomorrow. Do you mean to say he might become something greater than me? There was no reply. Before being interred in the cold, dark earth, I heard something. A success had been born to him, they said. I think this one can be none other than that success. The shot that one got off. That worthless piece of lead shook me with bone-breaking force. The voice halted. When it rang out again, it held an unexpected feeling. Remorse. I'm afraid I must ask you to die again after all, Sunya. As you wish. The crone replied joyously, bowing. Tears glistened in her eye. 10,000 years ago I lost this life along with you. My lord, but I was raised sooner than any other. That is enough to satisfy this old woman. To perish once more is nothing to me. I'm sorry. Why should you apologize to the likes of me? Tell that to every last living thing as they all meet their ends by your hand. That, an eternal curse on an entire planet, should be sung of you, and you shall be showered with praise from the hereafter. Her voice rose and dipped, a paean of interchanging gentleness and fervor, and the crone didn't wait for the nothingness that would follow. From garments that resembled an accumulation of resplendent trash, there appeared an arm like a withered tree. In her fist she gripped a slender dagger. Her other hand appeared, joining the first, and the crone used them to plunge the dagger into her own heart. A second later her body exploded into 100 billion drops of blood. The fog of blood eddied. At that point an arm appeared from the depths of the darkness. Sheathed in a long glove, it was stained with blood up to its black sleeve, but it held what looked for all the world like a single stone key. Extending the key into empty space, it was instantly shrouded in vermilion gauze. A baptism of blood, so that the castle may be restored. The words came in the voice of the crone. As if in response, from somewhere that could have been either quite distant or very close, there resounded a strident clank of hard objects meshing together. First part, end.